Okay, so what about interviews? This is the bit that people worry about most. It's the most alien to them. It's the bit that is most discussed in the newspapers. And they tend to assume that it's going to be really, really important, and it can be important, but mostly it's not a critical factor. Even calling the interviews is a bit problematic. It misleads you, potentially, because they're not really interviews in a conventional sense. What they really are is interactive aptitude tests. So it's more aptitude testing, but this time we're doing it with you face-to-face, and we're helping you as you work your way through the problems. Just kind of an extra dimension. Subject-focused. You'll probably have 2 of these of about 25 minutes each. Normally, a couple of lecturers and you on your own. Might be one-to-one. You'll never be in a group with other students in an interview. It'll always be you on your own in an interview, but usually 2, maybe even 3 of us, sometimes one-to-one, but 2 is most common. We'll be focusing upon the subject. We do this through problem-solving scenarios. There might be 4 or 5 of these within a 25-minute interview. Problems that we're going to discuss relating to your subject, and we'll do that through face-to-face discussion, debate. In some subjects, particularly in the sciences, we might also do it through technical working, where you're actually doing the algebra or the calculus, whatever it might be. But in the arts and humanities, it's mostly discussion-based, and even in the sciences, there's likely to be some discussion as well. The questions will be stretching, challenging, focused. They've got to be, because we want to see you think. What we're seeking to get at here is your capacity to be logical, to be analytical, to be perhaps imaginative, to make sense of conflicting information, to weigh evidence, to be commonsensical about conclusions in the face of information. And that will involve us prompting you, giving you more information, giving you suggestions, encouraging you, telling you if you're going down a blind alley. And it often also involves you asking us questions, maybe because we haven't explained something clearly enough or because you're not quite sure what we're after. What it will never involve is a hidden agenda, trick questions, good cop, bad cop, there's no such thing. It's always totally straightforward. And in that sense, the most important thing that you can do in this process is be yourself. Like with the personal statement, integrity, the truth, is your best friend and your best support. So if you get a question that you don't understand at interview, the really important thing is that you say immediately, I'm sorry, I don't understand that question. Or I've never covered anything like this. And we might then say to you, oh, let me rephrase. Or we might say, you've not got to that bit of the syllabus yet. No problem. We're going to do this one instead. So really important that you are straight about things. A very common answer at interview, and a very good answer, because it's both truthful and correct, is I don't know. So don't hesitate to say that if you don't. That gives us an opportunity as interviewers to say, okay, well, let's think about what you don't know, and let's see if we can find a way into this. And that's the sort of thing that we'll do all the time. So it's an interactive process in which you're not there to impress us or perform, you're there to solve the problems with our help, or work your way through the debate with our help. So we get a sense of how much you know, what you think, your logic, your analysis, your imagination, as I said earlier. What do we talk about? Well, first, here's a typical interview setting. A couple of colleagues of mine, my very good friend and colleague Nick Cutler, who is here, but who's now at the University of Newcastle, and Catherine Sumnall, who's admissions tutor at Sydney Sussex College, who, in fact, I admitted as an undergraduate when she was your age. That's how old I am. And they're doing a geography interview with this young lady. They're looking at a map, not a conventional map. I think it was a map of disease rather than a map of territory or relief. And that's a good example of the last bullet point on the slide here of prompt material, something at interview that no one has seen before, that gets all of the candidates on a level playing field. And we'll always try and do that at some point in one of the interviews. But the thing that we will mostly focus on wherever we can is what your academic work that you've covered in school or college. You know that well, you've learned it, you've already debated it with your teachers, with other students. That's something where you should be on a reasonably sure footing. We might talk to you about your wider reading or other wider academic exploration. There could be questions that come out of your UCAS personal statement that we want to check on with you. And if you've sent in written work, which in most arts and humanities subjects you will have done, though not in the sciences, we're very likely to talk to you at some point about the written work as well. So those are the things that we'll talk to you about. How do people do? They do well. We like a bit of data, so we're going to show you. This data relates to 1,500 interviews across a big range of subjects conducted in Cambridge 2 years ago, the year before last. And what you have here is the number of candidates achieving various interview scores. Here are the interview scores, and the percentages that related to those scores from the field. The scale that we use when we assess interviews, 1 to 10, is a universal scale. All colleges use it for every subject. The report form is identical. And each of these numbers means something. So 10 out of 10 is exceptional candidate, 9, very strong, certain offer, 8, strong offer, 7, probably worth an offer, 6, possibly worth an offer, 5, marginal for an offer, 4, relatively weak, 3, probably unacceptable, and then we actually don't bother defining 2 and 1 because there isn't really any point. And as you can see, almost no one gets those scores anyway. What you can see from this, I think pretty much straight away, is that 75% of the candidates who are interviewed, at the end of the interview, my colleagues look at one another and say, well, they were pretty good. In other words, they've done well. But only a very small number do extremely well. And that number is not enough to fill our places. So with about 5 applications per place, about 10, 11% getting 9s or 10s at interview, we're only going to be able to fill about half of our places with people who do really, really well at interview. In any case, some of the people who do really, really well at interview won't be offered a place. Why? Well, because there may be other dimensions of their application that are weaker relative to other candidates. What if they've had a really good interview with one of the interviewers, but the test is quite disappointing, or the written work is quite disappointing, or the reference is a bit disappointing? It gets quite difficult. And then in this range here, 6 to 8, we know from research that we've done that people with 8 don't necessarily do better in Cambridge than people with 7, and they don't necessarily do better than people with 6. So in practice, getting these scores at interview leaves you in pretty much the same place in the field. Good, but it's uncertain. And this is one of the reasons why interviews are not the decider in many cases. In and of themselves, they don't give you a certain judgment. You can see how many people get awarded 6s and 7s. That's colleagues saying, well, they seem pretty good to me, but I wouldn't like to bet my house on it. And that's a sensible judgment to make most of the time. Because in the end, interviews are an interesting thing, but a bit of a weird thing. We're trying to make a judgment in a 25-minute conversation or discussion about how good somebody is going to be during a 3-year degree course or a 4-year degree course. It's a bit like saying, well, we're going to work out how good somebody is at playing football by watching them play snooker or darts. There's an interrelationship there, but in the end, it's not the same thing. Yes, hand-eye coordination is a very important dimension in football and snooker, but there are so many other factors there as well. So interviews can be helpful, but they're not the be-all and end-all, and mostly people do well. So where don't people do well? Where do things go wrong? In a way, this is a mirror image of everything we've already discussed, and I'm not going to dwell on it. You need to avoid these things. Most of all, you need to avoid not doing wider reading, and you need to avoid not doing revision at key moments. Don't turn up at interview having not revised and therefore with insecure subject knowledge. Don't turn up at interview having done no wider reading. What are we going to talk to you about once we've got off school stuff? Are we going to be convinced that you're really that interested in your subject? And these final 2 points, I think I will just talk about a little bit more. Sometimes as interview people are not that analytical, they're not that good at synopsis, that's stepping back and seeing the big picture, summarising. They're not quite clear enough in their reasoning. And these are things that you can develop in yourself by asking yourself why all the time. So whenever you react to something, whenever you see something, say to yourself, why am I seeing this? Why am I reacting in this way? Why do I like it? Why don't I like it? Why is it convincing? Why is it not convincing? And have a go at explaining to yourself. That's the analytical process. You do it in your head. You can do it out loud, of course, in the modern world in which people talk on the telephone with earphones in. You can walk along the streets talking openly and people won't consider you to be mad. When I applied to university, if I'd walked along having a debate with myself about what I thought about things, I'd have been arrested. But you can do that safely now. So it's probably best to do it silently and in your head rather than out loud. So debate with yourself. Why do I think the things I think? Very important. And talk to your mum and dad, talk to your friends, talk to your teachers. Get used to explaining why. Get used to thinking about the big picture. So I think this thing, what else does that remind me of? What might it connect with? And try to be as clear as you can in your thinking and your expression. Try and explain exactly what you mean. This is something that you can get better at with practice. It's something to do, as I say, in your head as you go. The final thing here, one thing that sometimes, not very often, but sometimes can go wrong at interviews, that people dig their heels in. We give them new evidence about something that they've been taught is the right answer. This evidence contradicts what they've been taught. They think we're trying to catch them out. We're not trying to catch them out. There's new evidence. We want to see that they can take on board the new evidence and perhaps produce a new judgment. Or maybe make a judgment that the original judgment was right because there's some problem with the new evidence. So this is all about going with the flow, being yourself and being commonsensical. What makes a difference? By way of summary, how do you get in? These are the things that make a difference. You need to work hard, you need to think hard. That's the critical summary. Choose the right subject, having thought about it hard. Do as well as you can in exams at the end of this year, in particular exams at the end of school or college. Do some sustained wider reading and really think about it. Feed that into your personal statement. Do some practice for admissions tests, if you're in one of the many subjects that have tests. And if you're called for interview, do some revision in advance. Those are the things in practice that actually make a difference. Anything that's not on that list doesn't make a difference to your chance of getting in.